Good evening and welcome back to the Journey Home program. I'm your host, John Mark Grodi, here at EWTN. And once again, we have this great privilege to come together to hear a story of faith and conversion. We're joined tonight by Taylor Kemp. He's a Catholic revert. He came into the church in 2016, and he's now the Vice President of Content at the Augustine Institute. Taylor, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here tonight to share your story. And thank you for your work at Augustine Institute. I think people probably familiar with that. We've seen it in our parish bulletins, the invitation, a lot of awesome content coming out of there. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, it is great. I love working there, so it's a privilege.
Awesome. Well, we'll hear more about how you got there, but take us back to the beginning. Where does your story start?
Oh, where does it start? It starts in 1990. Let's see. I was baptized Catholic. I'm from Denver, Colorado. Was baptized. Thanks be to God, I was baptized as a Catholic, but was not raised as a Catholic. Was just brought up. I was like your absolute standard American secular young man. So I was brought up in just outside of Denver. Played a lot of sports, dated girls, didn't really have a whole lot of a religious background, but as I'm sure will be heard, soccer was really the main focus of my life, and just brought up, I had wonderful parents, I have two older sisters, and just had a great, I just can't help but kind of say classic American upbringing. That was really wonderful. So I guess that's the broadest sense of where did it all start.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now your parents, had they been religious, or was this kind of the religious experience that they knew themselves in terms of just more the identity, but not?
Yeah, mixed bag. So my mom was brought up Catholic in a big Catholic family, but she didn't remain Catholic really ever since college. And then my dad wasn't religious really at all, and the home that I was brought up in, I was the youngest, but this was true for my sisters too. Was we were not particularly religious. We would go to a kind of a mega non-denominational church on Christmas and Easter, as just I think kind of particular for my mom. She had a desire to have some religion present in our home, which was a great blessing in its own right, but it wasn't something that was like in our lives, in it day to day. My mom had me go to a non-denominational Christian elementary school, but that was more for the education merits than it was for the kind of religious import. So, when I was growing up and through my teenage years, and when I went through college, if you would have asked me, do you believe in God? I think I would have said maybe. I would have, it would have been, sure, move on to the next question. It wasn't something that I thought much about. It wasn't something that was part of our life. But I certainly would have never also said I was an atheist or something. I wouldn't have said, like, I certainly don't believe. It was just, hey, let me go back to soccer practice. Let me go, back to the movies. Like, it was just not a part of our life. So my mom certainly wanted a religious element, but the faith wasn't alive, I would say, in our home, particularly growing up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So soccer became a big deal for you.
Soccer was, sports were. We were a big sports family. Both my parents played sports casually, and then my oldest sister played soccer competitively, and she went on scholarship to Wake Forest, which was a really great women's soccer program. So I just grew up playing sports. I played soccer, I played golf, I played basketball, I played lacrosse, so played all different kinds of things. And then, as you get older, you can't play all of them. You have to give more time to one or the other. They compete in seasons. And so as I got older and older, it was soccer that always kind of stuck around. So really by the time I entered high school, I was a very good soccer player. I had really removed a lot of the other sports, and that became, for sure, like the central focus. It was very clear from the time I was entering high school, but really by the time I was going into my sophomore year, that it was very much about which college am I going to go to, where am I going to play. Soccer was the love of my life at the time.
Gotcha. Where'd you end up going to college?
So I went to the University of Maryland. They were the reigning national champions for Division I. So I was, there's always an awkward part where you kind of have to brag about yourself. But I was the number 2 recruit coming out of for soccer in the whole country. So I was not number 1 recruit out of Colorado, but the number 2 recruit in the whole country. In high school, I had played with the U18 and U20 national teams. So for those that are not familiar with soccer, there's multiple stages in the youth soccer experience where you can play on what's called your state team, and it's a collection of the best players in the state, and then you can play on your regional team, and it's a collection of the best players in the region of the states that are clustered, west, central, east. And then there's the national team, which is the gathering of the best players in the country. So I was with the U18, meaning under the age of 18. I was with that national team, and then I was with the U20s, and then eventually I was with the full team. So anyways, kept kind of progressing through that system. So I was the number 2 recruit coming out of high school. I was a good nationally recognized player. Maryland was the reigning national champions, so they were the number 1 team in the country. I was the number 1 recruit to get chosen by them, and then went to the University of Maryland to play.
All right. Well, what happened there? Yeah.
Maryland was great. It was a great college. I loved my team. We never won a national championship, which was a sadness, but won many ACC championships. They're in the Big Ten now, so they're not even. Wow. But at the time, they were in the ACC. So, but we were a very good college team. Maryland functioned as a pro feeder team. Really, it was one of the few colleges. There was really about 5 at the time where they had the most number of players that went professional, and so. When I went there, it was very much the goal was to go to MLS or go play overseas in Europe. I was our team captain since my junior year. I played every minute of every game since I was a freshman all the way until I had an injury in my senior year, but was a player throughout. And then I left college early to enter the MLS draft, and then I was drafted in the first round from Maryland to DC United, where I spent the rest of my pro career.
All right. And so all throughout this time, still basically just kind of living a secular life,
Yeah, very much. Yeah. So wasn't religious. I was, and this will be a bigger part of the whole story, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, who played an absolutely integral part of my conversion. Okay. We dated long distance all the way through college. So she went to Colorado State University. We met right after high school. She went to Colorado State University and I went to Maryland, so we dated long distance. And she was brought up Catholic, and she really held on to many of her Catholic practices. I wouldn't say that she was a practicing Catholic though, but she would always go to Mass every Sunday, thanks be to God. But we were dating throughout. So the only kind of religious tie or import I had at all was her, but at that time she wasn't I wasn't going to Mass with her. She wasn't, it didn't matter to her, even though she was going. So yeah, I was just a very secular college athlete at the time. So, there's no point in going into the details, but for the college athletic lifestyle, there was plenty of drinking and just the college culture that most people are familiar with. That was certainly my story, but my eyes were entirely fixed on how can I become a professional soccer player, or how can we win a championship at Maryland. So it was very much, it was soccer. It was soccer for a long, long time.
Yeah. All right. Well, what happened next?
So I got drafted to DC United in the first round. This was in the 2013 draft, so I went there. And then I had a lot of injuries in my senior year of college that I had mentioned, and so I was still recovering from those injuries when I went to DC. And so long story short, had to kind of fight my way onto the roster, but it ended up working out. And then really by my second year was an established player on the team, which was great. For a lot of, this is just true of professional sports, but certainly in professional soccer, like the biggest challenge is to get out of your rookie contract. It's to really find some way to get on the field, to prove to your coaches that you can play there, and then move into your second contract. That's kind of what allows you to move into your second life or whatever, get past the beginning. So anyways, I was doing that. So soccer was going well, is kind of what I would say. But now what's in the background here is, like I had said, my girlfriend and I had dated long distance through all of college. She had graduated from CSU and she had moved out to Washington, D.C. And so we were living together in D.C. And I had, let's just say, tremendous moral failure in my years in college as it related to my girlfriend. And she didn't know about it. And it was interesting, when she moved out to DC, like I said, she was going to Mass. And she did now, we were living together, there was a desire, she wanted me to come with her, and so I started going to Mass with her, which was my first introduction to the Mass. Now, I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have much of a religious upbringing, so I never had the kind of traditional hang-ups of like some of the Protestant hang-ups or some of the other ones. I didn't have any of those. So to me, going to the Mass was just weird. It wasn't like problematic.
Right.
I was just kind of like, this is an odd way to do things. Like we're all standing, we're all sitting, there's the talks. And so I remember going to Mass just thinking it was kind of annoying, but there wasn't a problem with it. But I went with her. I went to Mass with her for 2 years. This was at St. Peter's on Capitol Hill. Now, it's so beautiful to look back on now, but I didn't know it at the time. My conscience was starting to come alive a little bit. And I didn't know, I didn't see the correlation at the time, but I had lived a super morally compromised life in college in a way that hurt my girlfriend in a way that she didn't know. And then I was going to Mass for these years, and all of a sudden I just couldn't sleep. I really was I was just up at night, and I came to this realization, especially because Brittany and I, Brittany's her name, we had been together for a while, so we were thinking naturally about marriage. And I was coming to the realization that I could not propose to her if she didn't know the truth of some of the things that I had done. And I am entirely confident that this was tied to my going to Mass. There was just something about being at Mass, and I went every week with her. I wasn't receiving, I wasn't really even participating, but I was listening, right, that my conscience was coming alive. And I came to the realization that I cannot marry this girl without her knowing the truth, which was just like an unbelievable grace. And then I'm sure there's listeners out there, many people have faced the deep kind of awakening of their conscience, in which they're faced with the brutal challenge of admitting something that was, terrible. It's going to be challenging, and then having to wrestle with the right to the truth that people have. And that's where I was with Brittany. Is I was trying to, if I could justify my way out of it in any way, it's fine, I'm different now, she doesn't need to know. And then these sleepless nights of she has to know. And so this is all going on. So my career's going well. Brittany and I are living together. My conscience is awakening, is kind of awakening, and for probably about 3 or 4 months, I am in this really deep state of tension. I am not sleeping well. I'm having a hard time being kind of authentic and real with Brittany. Everything's kind of a challenge, and then I decide I have to tell her the truth. But I'm so afraid of this that I cannot tell her in person. I tried to work up the courage to tell her in person. And so, the long story short, she goes and visits her sister overseas who was studying abroad, and I write her an email. This is not advised.
Oh boy.
This is not advised. But this was I was like, this is the best I can do. I can't tell her the truth in person. So I write her an email, and I lay it all out there. And I do that knowing full well when I click send, I'm like, I may never see her again. I know that this might be it, but this is an incredible moment of grace for me. I remember being like, I can tell her, and she could leave me, which would break my heart. I really loved her, imperfectly, but I loved her. And I was like, but I can live with myself more if I tell her, and if she leaves, I'm more okay with that than if I marry this girl without her knowing. Were you gonna say something?
Well, it really is an amazing thing, that, like you said, the sort of the miracle of grace there, to have one's conscience awakened, right? Because there are a lot of people who do go through life, right, and like we know, through faith, through revelation, we know that all of us are sinners in need of a Savior, and without Christ we can do nothing. But if you haven't been awakened to that fact, right? Like you don't see what you don't see. And I'm sure there was some latent sacramental graces from your baptism.
That's right.
But even that thought that just being there at the Mass began to awaken your conscience in a way that caused the short-term problems, but set you on a path towards truth.
They did truth and freedom. Like there was so much. My career in soccer was complicated too. Like I said, like I was a very good player. I had a really great career, but I was tormented by anxiety. I lived under a cloud of fear that it's difficult to. I'm sure many people have experienced the same thing, but it was really powerful. I was constantly terrified of losing my position. I was terrified of an injury. I was terrified of this. I was terrified of that. Like I was so stressed out all the time. And I also believe that stress was also tied to this sinful past that I had never been reconciled. Like we're not made to live like that. And so I tell Brittany, and I click send on this email, and I'm like, I'm probably never going to see her again. And I don't hear from her for about 10 days. And so I'm like, it's over. I'm thinking that I'm going to get a text or a call or whatever. Hey, I need you to pack up my stuff and ship it back to Denver. And I'm like, okay, I can live with that. And 10 days passes, knock on our apartment door, open it, and it's her. And, she's totally shattered. She's totally broken down. And I'll spare the details. The months that come, Brittany and I, we love each other very imperfectly, but we want to fix it. We want to get through this. We want to make it work. Like Brittany, God bless her, I can't believe this, but she is like, I want to figure this out. I want to make it work. So do I. So we spend months trying to put the pieces back together, and nothing works. Like nothing works. We try everything that we can think of to repair the damage that had been done, and she ended up hurting me in return. And it was just this crazy time because all we wanted to do was to heal. All we wanted to do was to heal, and we couldn't. So every night ended almost every night ended in tears, in a fight, in something, and we couldn't. And eventually, after months of this, I come to Brittany and I'm like, Britt, like what we're doing it's hell. It's hell on earth. Like what we're doing, this is not love. Like we're killing each other. We're literally killing each other. And I was like, Britt, this can't work. Like, I think you have to leave me. Like, I think you got to go back home. Like, I want this to work, but this is so unhealthy. And she takes a couple days and she comes back and she's like, Taylor, we've tried everything, but we haven't tried God. Yeah. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And she goes, I'd like you to enter RCIA. And I was like, what? What's RCIA? And she's like, this is you've been going to Mass for a couple years now. I would like you to go through this thing. I'd like you to consider becoming Catholic. I'm like, okay, where do I sign? And she's like, no, it's this 7-month thing. You go to this class for 7 months. And I was like, no way, I'm not doing that. So I actually say no, because I'm like, I'm not against Catholicism, but I'm somewhat against organized religion. I just didn't like. I'm such an American. Like, with these kind of America was founded very much with these Protestant foundations, and I was just built to be a relativist. Like I was like, I didn't like you have to be this and that the Catholic claim to be the one church. I knew enough that that's what the claim was. Yeah. I was like, I don't have to join. I don't. And so I said no. And she ended up, Brittany's pretty fiery. She's pretty strong-willed. She signs me up anyways, and she doesn't tell me. And then 2 days before the first class, she's like, hey, Taylor, the first class is Tuesday, and you have to go, or we're done. And so I'm like, okay, fine. So I'm like, I'll go. Like, forces me into it. So this was at St. Peter's on Capitol Hill. So I go in. It's, I think it was about September. This was in 2015 now. So it was September. For anybody who's been in Washington, D.C. in September, it can be brutally hot, 100% humidity. So it's a hot Tuesday evening. It's 7 or 7:30 p.m. And I go into St. Peter's, which I had been in the church, but I had never been in the classroom. So I go into the church. I go into this basement classroom, and it's like the worst parish basement classroom you can possibly imagine. Like yellow wallpaper peeling from the wall. There's a huge picture of Pope Francis that says "Porn kills love." There's a stack of there's a stack of catechisms sitting on a table, and I'm like, catechism's not a word. Like, I've never heard of that. That's not a word. And it's small and it's cramped. And the St. Peter's had a great RCIA class, so it was big. That like there was a lot of people coming, which praise God. But I was like, this is cramped. I'm like a B or C level celebrity too, so I'm like a little nervous. I'm like, this gets so embarrassing. People are gonna recognize me. And so I sit in the back of the class, like arms folded, kind of like, I can't believe I'm here. And I remember sitting there, and Brittany went with me, and I remember sitting back in class just thinking like, all right, I'm gonna stick this out for like 2 months, and then I'm gonna drop out and tell Brittany, I tried, and we'll figure it out. And so that's kind of my resolution. So I'm begrudgingly there. It's hot, and I hear the door open and slam shut, and in walks this man. He's short, a little round, and he's wearing what looks to me like to be a bed sheet, and he's got a huge rosary clang from his hip. And for anybody out there, this man's obviously a Dominican priest, but I had never seen a Dominican priest. I had only ever seen a priest in a collar. And so I lean over to Brittany, and I'm like, is that a priest? She's like, I think so. And this priest was Father Thomas Joseph White. He's a great theologian and teacher. He's now the rector of the Angelicum in Rome, but he was at the Dominican House of Studies at the time, and he loved teaching RCIA. So he was our teacher. So I'll pause there, because this is going to kind of catapult us into the next portion.
Yeah, well, that's a good place for a break anyway. We'll come back here in a couple minutes and hear the rest of it. Again, we're joined tonight by Taylor Kemp, a Catholic revert, former MLS player, and we'll hear the rest of his story in just a minute. I want to remind you before the break just that if you go to chnetwork.org/story, you can find all kinds of conversion stories, episodes of the Journey Home program, as well as written version of people's stories from every background. If you're someone who's on the journey to the Catholic Church, if you're thinking about it, if you're exploring, you're going to find somebody on there who's a little bit like you. So check that out at chnetwork.org/story. We'll be back. Well, welcome back to the Journey Home program. We're entering the second half of our hour tonight, speaking with Taylor Kemp. He's a Catholic revert. He's now the vice president of content at the Augustine Institute, and he was a former MLS player. And when we left off your story, your soccer career is going well, but you'd gone to Mass. You're starting to have conscience issues, about things that had happened in your, during your relationship, unbeknownst to your girlfriend, and so that you let her know all that. And now you're in RCIA. And so what happened next?
So RCIA was amazing, is the short. So right before we went into the break, I mentioned that I was pretty reluctantly there. I wasn't really planning on sticking it out. And I get to that first class, and in comes this Dominican priest. His name is Father Thomas Joseph, and he teaches the class. And RCIA was amazing. Obviously, I'm here, so I stuck it out. But it was just unbelievable. This is really just a great credit to great teachers. The church has so many great teachers, historically so many great teachers today. But in RCIA, as someone who didn't come from a religious background, who was very secular, who was brought up with a lot of the kind of just fundamental American values and drives for success, there I am in RCIA, and I hear Father Thomas Joseph talking about what is sin, right? Like a word I had heard but never kind of had unpacked. I'm hearing about human sexuality and how it is meant to be used and what happens when we misuse it. I'm hearing about the sacraments and why God gave them, and the incarnation, and what is atonement and what is redemption? Who is Jesus Christ and who am I? And I was just, I was kind of in the back of the class, arms crossed for maybe a month. About 2 or 3 months in, I'm like, this is interesting. Like, I started actually not dreading Tuesdays and being like, oh, what am I going to hear about today? Probably 4 or 5 months in, I was like, I think he's right about some of this stuff. Like, it makes sense. It makes sense. And then 6 months in, I was, obviously, we were in the kind of the scrutinies and approaching when I would have to give my assent to faith and be confirmed, because I had been baptized as a baby. And 6 months in, I was like, you know what? I don't know what I exactly think about all this. I don't obviously totally understand the Trinity. I don't totally know what I think about the person of Jesus Christ. I don't totally understand the Pope. I don't totally understand the Catholic Church. But I was like, I believe enough to say yes, and I'll spend the rest of my life, filling in the details. And so I had just a really beautiful conversion.
Was Brittany along for the ride?
She was.
She was attending as well.
So she was coming, and it was really similar to her.
Okay.
She was brought up in a mixed faith home. Her mom was Catholic and her dad was a Protestant, and so, but she had always been more Catholic than anything else. So she had always gone to Mass, but wasn't going to the sacrament of confession, didn't receive a great catechesis. So for her, it was similar. She was like, I've never heard this either. And so it was great being alongside each other during this. And then the other thing that was unbelievable was our relationship began to heal. We had these months of trying to put the pieces back together ourselves, and it was just like roadblock after roadblock, failure after failure, and it just wouldn't work. And then all of a sudden, we started healing, which was, I believe it was a twofold action. There was grace. We were opening ourselves up to God in ways that we had not before. And so he was filling us, and God is the divine physician. He was healing us. But the other side was very much on the intellectual side. The church gave us a language to understand how we hurt each other and what it did to each other. And that's really a powerful tool when you begin to understand, like, I did this and I acted from this place, from insecurity or fear, and then this had this effect. Just understanding that enough it gave us the ability to kind of look at each other and actually even be able to say, I know what I did to you and I'm sorry. To accept the full weight of what I had done. Because I remember understanding, again, the teaching on sin and how we hurt each other. And I was like, I began to more deeply understand how deeply I hurt Brittany. And so that be able to give her a more complete I'm sorry, which goes a long way. And so we began to heal, and it was really beautiful. I had been also addicted to pornography for a long time, and it was in RCIA that I began to realize that was problematic and kind of do battle against that. And so I was kind of weeding that out of my life. Brittany and I are being given the vocabulary and an understanding and grace to heal, and it was really amazing. About probably 4 or 5 months into RCIA, it was like clear as day. I woke up one day and I was like, oh, I have to propose. Like, I have to marry this girl. And there's a beautiful teaching in that too. I can't help but always try to add little teaching moments, but one of them is we're not, sin makes you stupid. It clouds our vision. And so I wasn't able to see Brittany clearly because of our past. And so as these things are beginning to be cleared up, as reconciliation is beginning to happen, and I could see her more clearly, it was clear as day to me, I have to marry this girl. And so the next week I went and bought a ring. So I proposed to her in the middle of RCIA, which was really incredible, because we were in turmoil maybe 5 months, 6 months before that. Yeah. So anyways, when people ask like, what was the instruments, why did you convert? I was like, well, moral failure, a pretty girl, and a good teacher. All obviously infused with the grace of God. But those are really the three big ones. So this was now Easter in 2016. I come to the Easter Vigil for my confirmation, and I was like all in. And I was like, I don't know what half of this stuff means. I know enough to give a genuine and authentic yes. Like, Lord, I do not understand all, but I trust you enough that I believe this is true. And yes, here's my yes. And from that moment on too, I was like, I'll spend the rest of my life figuring out the rest of this. And so entered the church. It was super messy. It was messy on the family side. It was messy in the locker room. I mean, you can imagine, like I said, I was just a super secular guy, and professional sports locker rooms are not the most, they're not super moral places. And so I was changing a lot. That was difficult on my friendships. That was difficult on my teammates. That was difficult on my family. And so it was kind of like chaos everywhere, but like complete joy and peace in me. And in the next most important thing in the natural world, which was my relationship with Brittany as we were approaching our wedding. So 2016 was just a really special and crazy and chaotic year, but entered the church, which was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, again, she continued to be impacted by this journey as well on her side. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. It was very similar to my experience, probably just like a pitch down because it wasn't, totally new, but it was a total revitalization for her, a return to the sacrament of confession, a different understanding and fidelity to the Mass. We started taking up the more traditional devotions like the Rosary. We started reading Scripture. So it was very much, it was a great kind of alongside each other. And for me, it was totally new. And for her, it was new, but she was historically Catholic. So I come to the church. She's coming alongside me. It's great. Life's a bit messy. And I have the best year of my entire career. And I attribute that not to the fact that I did what God wanted, so he gave me all the kind of soccer success I could dream of. It wasn't that. It was because when I became Catholic, I realized how much my identity had been wrapped up in being a soccer player, which my whole life had been about, and that is not who I am, that I am a son of the Lord, and that that's my identity. And so all of a sudden, all of the anxiety and fear that I had been living with for so long from soccer, it just kind of disappeared. And so I was no longer afraid of failure, which was a huge deal. Yeah. And for anybody who's in kind of performance psychology, when you're trying to perform in a state of fear, it like significantly dampens your performance. You get tunnel vision. It's a hard place to be in. And that's how I had been operating, and many professional athletes that I know actually play in that state. And all of a sudden I wasn't afraid, and that kind of freed me up to play differently, and I played a lot better. And so I had the best year of my career. It was after that I was called into the full national team ahead of our 2017 World Cup qualifiers, which was like the highlight pinnacle of my year, which was great. And then in 2017, I had a really small injury that I was supposed to recover from, and I had a hard time recovering from it. And a couple months later, and had to get a surgery. A couple months later, was supposed to be coming back. I couldn't recover, had another injury, had to get another surgery. And then this was now in the spring of 2018. So my injury started at the end of 2017. In the spring of 2018, I just couldn't get better, and I flew up to Boston to see a specialist, and I sat down with him. They did all the scans to figure out what was going on, and he goes, "Taylor, there's a surgery that you need, and it's gonna be great. You're gonna be way better off because of this surgery, and you'll never play high-level sports again." And so that was in May of 2018. In June, I had the surgery, and in October of that year, I retired from professional soccer. So it was it was just converted in 2016, played my last soccer game in 2017, and then left soccer entirely in 2018.
It had to have been a bit of an identity crisis.
Yeah, it was and it wasn't. The Lord had done a lot to prepare me for that moment when it came, which I didn't know at the time. He he had helped me kind of have a more healthy understanding of how much my identity had been wrapped up in soccer and was kind of course correcting. And then also after my conversion in 2016, as is probably evident, I fell in love with really the theology and philosophy side of things, about learning about the faith. Like, it was so illuminating. And then being able to kind of shape my life around those things was really powerful. So I fell in love with learning. And after that, I started just reading. I was just buying like the top seller Christian books off of Amazon, which can get you in some hot water. And I had some good friends that were like, what are you reading? And I would tell them, like, don't read that book. And so they had recommended, like, they were like, you should probably look into some further education. Like, you really seem to love this stuff. And I started a Bible study in my locker room. I was just loving handing on what I was learning. Really, what began in RCIA, I was just like, I gotta tell people about this. Like the Samaritan woman, like, you just gotta tell people. And I was doing that. And so I discovered kind of this love of handing on what I was learning. And so I had some friends that knew that, and they knew that I was buying all these books. They're like, you should look in some furthering education. So I just Googled online Catholic graduate programs. And that's how I found the Augustine Institute, the place that I now work. Is they have an online graduate in theology. And so I looked there and a couple others, and I had some friends that had gone through the program. So I called them and they're like, oh, just go through it, it's awesome. So that's how I got connected to the Augustine Institute. And so I was a distance education student. So that's relevant, because that's how I ended up getting to the place that I now work. But the other thing is, I was in these classes, we're going through all of Scripture, we're going through the history of the church, and I'm just completely enamored by all of these things. And so, as you're looking at the soccer side of things, how I'm having a good year and then I start to have these injuries, my heart had already kind of started moving in this way of, I discovered this deep love of teaching. I wouldn't have called it teaching at the time. Like, I just was like, I'll do a Bible study with one person. I don't care. And I just was like, I got to tell somebody what had been handed on to me. And so I this kind of love of teaching and formation had really started to find its place in me. And so as I'm at the Augustine Institute and I'm doing my first year as a distance ed student while I'm still playing, I am actually aware of there's these movements in my heart of like, I have a love for this that is like so astronomically higher than my love of soccer.
Wow.
So my heart was like moving there. I had no idea God was going to take me out of soccer.
Yeah.
But I was like, it was crazy. Like, my life as a professional athlete was super tortured. It was something, I liked it, but like I also hated it. It was so weird. Like, to some extent, I mean, this is kind of sad, and I also don't think it's necessarily rare. I hadn't like really loved soccer since probably high school.
Yeah.
Because it became almost a professional environment since I went to college. And it truly was a job in like the worst sense of a job. It was very obligatory. I did it because I was supposed to. And so as I'm still playing and I'm now learning theology and I'm beginning to have small opportunities of passing that on, I was like, this is so much better. I was like more looking forward to the Bible studies after practice than practice. And so then when my injuries came along, my first thing was like, oh, injuries happen, no big deal, I've had them before. This is just more time that I can now study, and I'll get better in time. And then, months and months and months and months and months went on, and eventually I got totally used to not being on the field. And I was basically just like ministering to the guys in the locker room. And I started a Bible study the previous year with 1. By the end of my second year, it was up to 9, and 2 guys ended up entering the church. Wow. And truly, by the time, I had that really significant conversation with that doctor in Boston that was like, you'll never play high-level sports again. My reaction to that, which was a total, like, God prepared me for that moment, was, okay. I was like, I'm good with that. No idea what I was going to do, no idea what that meant, but I was like, yeah, okay, I know what I'm going to go do. Like, I didn't know what that was by way of a job, but I was like, I know what I'm pointing myself out. And then there was so surgery happens. I'm pretty at peace, which was a total miracle because my whole life was wrapped up in that, and come to terms with that soccer's ending. And then, a big moment in my soccer career that I look back on with tremendous gratitude to God which was really revelatory to me. I look back on this and it was most especially important to me, is October when I retire. So I have that surgery, I'm recovering, but it's very clear, I'm not returning to high level sports just like the doctor had said. I wasn't able to get the motion back that I needed. And so October, I asked for a meeting with our GM, Dave Casper, and my head coach, Ben Olson, to tell them. And they kind of knew. I mean, I had been hurt. I had now at this point been out. I had been injured for 14 months, so over a year. So like this wasn't going to blindside them, but I was going to tell them, you guys, hey. And my contract was up at the end of the year, so it was like really natural. Like this isn't going to work. So I asked them for a meeting, and I go in there, and I had worked with them for 6 years too. So we had known each other, and I sit down with them, and I was like, hey, you guys know I've been in the rehab. It's just like the doctor said. It's not. I'm not getting the motion back. It's not going to happen. I want to announce my retirement to the team, and this is going to be my last year. And they were like, oh, we thought this was probably likely. We're so sad. And the GM Dave turns to me and he goes, Taylor, we've actually been talking. We would love to just extend your contract one more year just to keep you in the locker room because we think you're really good for the guys and you've been here a long time. And we know you probably won't play, but who knows? Maybe you will. But we basically, they're like, we'll just keep you here just to keep you here in the locker room. And without like any hesitation, I was like, that's, thank you. Like, that's a tremendous thing. I'm ready to move on. And I look back on that for kind of strength many, many times to be like, oh my gosh, how the Lord had prepared me for departure is just so great. Yeah. It was like clear as day to me. This is the direction that I'm supposed to go in. So I retire. My wife and I fly to France, and we take a train down to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and we walk the 34-day full French way Camino.
Wow.
With a slightly not totally back to normal hip, which is ill-advised, but we do the whole thing because we didn't have kids yet, and we were like, when else are we going to be able to do this? We fly back to Denver in 2019. We move in with her parents. I have no job prospects. I have no plan. All the credibility that I have is in sports, which I've basically, feel that the Lord is saying that's not where you're going. And finished my degree at the Augustine Institute in person in 2019. After that, or really in the middle of that, while I'm finishing my degree, I do get hired through the help of a good friend, Dr. Sri. He helps me get hired at the Denver Catholic Biblical and Catechetical Schools, which it's an adult faith formation program that teaches scripture in 4 years and the catechism in 2. So I teach for them for a while. COVID hits. It's an in-person program, blows the whole thing up, and then in an unbelievably providential way, send my resume into the Augustine Institute and get hired on Deformed. And so I've been there ever since. I'll pause there. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. And again, like you pointed out there, God's amazing providence in preparing you for that shift.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't always happen. I would imagine that a big part of it is just the fact that you were so docile to the Holy Spirit preparing you. I think sometimes we aren't as docile to that, and so sometimes the changes are maybe more rough than they need to be because and God's often maybe leading us along, but we're not quite ready for it.
Yeah, and if I look back, because I would say yes, by God's providence, I was quite open, and I think a huge reason for that was because my life had just been in like turmoil. I had the relationship problems, and then I had seen how the Lord healed those, and I had this anxiety and fear in playing soccer, and God kind of removed that, and so I was in this state of like, I don't know anything. Like, yeah. I was like, I had architected my life up to this point, and it led to just pain and ruin and anxiety. And he had addressed those in challenging, obviously, particularly on the relational side, really difficult paths, but coming out on the other side of them with like real peace and real joy that, by the time the injury stuff came along, I was like, Lord, whatever you want. Like I don't know anything. And you can do whatever you want, which is so great. But it was a cost to get there. Yeah. Like Brittany and I's relationship almost completely collapsed. Right. I almost like lost my mind from stress and anxiety. Yeah. But yeah, like it was, the Lord worked in such a way that by the time these big moments came, I was like pretty surrendered. I was pretty abandoned to, Lord, I've taken control of my life and architected it, and it didn't work. So whatever you want, like take it in whatever direction you want.
A theme came out earlier. We were talking about truth and freedom, right, and the connection between those two, right? Because you were awakened to a desire for truth, but there was a wrestling there early on in your story, and really throughout your story, of wanting to. There's a part of us that wants to maintain a freedom apart from truth.
Yes.
But it's not a real freedom. The only true freedom is on the other side of truth. So it involves a certain surrender there. And it can be scary.
Yeah, it was, and there was a lot. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
One, I wanted freedom. We all want freedom. We're made for freedom, but under the right conditions.
Yeah, freedom for.
Yes, not freedom from, freedom for, and that was one of the biggest things that I didn't like about coming to the church. Was like I knew that my freedom was going to be restricted, and so I didn't like that. So I wanted freedom, and this was so true of me. I was an absolute relativist without ever even knowing that I was or what that word meant. Like, meaning I didn't really think there was an objective truth. I thought people could make their own truth. Like, I was just brought up in secular America. That was just in the water. It's just in the way that we think, or at least in the suburban parts of Colorado that I was brought up in. It was just, well, like, you do you, whatever works for you, as long as you're not harming anybody. Like, and I had taken that in. And that was really what you're saying was so important for the RCIA process. When Father Thomas Joseph is teaching about all these things, like what grabbed me was obviously not like, oh, these are cool ideas. Right. You're like, no, this is like bedrock true.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, when you kind of take yourself and you measure yourself against something, you realize, like, there are these fundamental laws that govern the universe that God set up, and that our joy is conforming ourselves to those, and that's what results in freedom. And that was totally my experience.
Yeah.
Trying to reform certain elements of my moral life as it related to sexuality, you realize, like, oh, I restricted I completely turned myself into a prisoner. So yeah, there was this, that's the drama almost of every single human life.
Yeah.
We are made for freedom, but like Adam and Eve in the garden, we want to do it on our terms. We want to grasp and take possession of something that it is not our right to have. And then the result of that is slavery. Yeah. That was my story. It's all of our story.
Well, I feel like, again, an offshoot of this, or a connection too, is your sense. You'd mentioned that ever since high school, you'd lost even the joy of the game, right? And there was this anxiety to it, not wanting to fail and all of that. But you had this moment almost after, I like to think of it almost after the Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, you surrender to truth, and you've now, you're open to the reality of things again. And on the other side of that is now you can go back to the game of life, the game of soccer, with this true freedom to just enjoy it.
Yes. And it's like this lightheartedness.
Yeah.
And that you're right, that it's not just about, that was true for soccer, but it's just true of life.
Right.
That when we're in, whatever, like our best state, when we're most in tune, what are we doing? We're relying like children on a loving Father. We're trusting that He's providing for our needs in mysterious ways, that whatever He's taking us through, that He'll provide for us. And that can give you this kind of state of like, okay, whatever crosses come, whatever challenges come, whatever joys come, whatever opportunities come, I can receive them like a child. And that is such a fun way to live. And that totally happened for soccer, because then I could approach it as, oh, if I get hurt today, it's okay. Oh, if we lose, it's okay. If I lose my contract and somebody takes my spot, it's okay. There's and then all of a sudden you're free. You're free, and no one can take that from you. Which, and it's funny, for those of us that are seeking to live good Catholic lives, how easy it is for us to fall back into that old mindset, to forget the deeper truths of things, that God is a good Father who will provide for us, and to rely on ourselves or to rely on others, to put our foundation, to put our safety into something else. I'm still falling into that all the time.
Well, I think this is one of the reasons that God commands us to take a Sabbath, right? Right, because in other words, if left to our own devices, even our desire to do good, to do good work for the kingdom, will slowly become a corruption and a point of pride and anxiety, and we're trying to do it all on our own. So God commands us once a week, you will set aside that, and you'll remember that this isn't, your work isn't the beginning and ending of things.
No.
The feast is the beginning and end of things.
Yes. There's I'm reading Through the Soul of the Apostolate, which is a great book. Yeah. And the whole first part of that you could summarize as the importance for those of us that are faithful and trying to kind of work out our salvation in fear and trembling. We must never worship the works of God over the God of works. And, I work in a Catholic apostolate, and I'm like, I have to remember that every single day. It's so easy. Pride is so subtle, and it's the reason, it's the fundamental, it's what we find in the garden, is just this desire to take possession and ownership, and to forget God's place, and to let trust die in our heart. So yeah, that is, it's always a struggle, and we always have to, not, love the giver, not the gift, so to speak. But it's always hard. It's
such an important theme, right? Especially for people, like you said, in ministry, because again, your work will either be this point of pride that separates you from God, or it will be this point of obedience and love. And it just depends on your relationship to sort of the Sabbath, or the Sunday, or just the recognition of God's providence and His grace.
Yep, and being able to, just truly let things go on the Sabbath, but even in little parts of the day of just disconnecting from different things. Yeah, but it's incredibly important. That's
wonderful. We just have a few minutes left, so tell us a little bit about your work with the Augustine Institute.
Yeah. Augustine Institute's a great place. Yeah. If you haven't heard of it, just go ahead and give it a Google. So the Augustine Institute was founded as a graduate school. So at the heart of it, we are a school. We only do upper education. So we have 4 graduate programs. We have a master's in theology, master's in pastoral theology, biblical studies, and Catholic education. Those are the 4. So I went through the master's in theology. So we do that, but we do a lot more than that too. We also have Formed, which is a video and audio streaming app. It has great Catholic content that people can find. We do all kinds of things, and we produce content in-house. We have a studio, so we do all different kinds of things. We make podcasts, and we make documentaries, and all different kinds of stuff, so you can find that. But we also work with over 100 different content providers that are also bringing content on there. My recommendation out there is certainly for parents. So I have 3 little kids. You have kids. Lots of us out there have kids, and it's a hard time to have kids in the culture today. There's lots of harmful stuff out there that you can find on whatever, YouTube or Disney. We are doing a lot to try to build up our kids' content on Formed. So for parents, you can find that. We also have the Amen app, which is a free Catholic prayer and meditation app. And we have Word of Life, which is a curriculum program for schools. So we do all different kinds of things. You can go on the website to find some of that. And then one of the most recent projects that just came out that I'm excited about, and I was actually able to be the co-host of it, was a new program called Symbolon, which is 16 30-minute episodes. It walks through the foundations of the Catholic faith. So it really takes the creed as a guide. It's great for small group studies, Bible studies, RCIA, OCI programs, but it's great. So for anybody out there, you can go to augustineinstitute.org/Symbolon. You can check that out. But that is our latest. We're really excited about it, really proud of it, and hope it is a great tool and resource for the church.
That's awesome. Thank you for your work there, and that. Yeah, we parents need all the help that we can get raising our kids in the faith. Again, with another minute or so left here, if there are parents out there who are concerned, they want to bring up their kids in the faith. Their kids are passionate about sports or other things in life. How do we encourage them to contextualize those things in light of the faith?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do get that question a lot for sports. Yeah. Sports it's a growing thing here in the States, that's for sure. And as Catholics, so much of our life is dependent upon in what order do we put things, right? There's so many goods out there. In what order do we put them in the, kind of what you're alluding to is it's easy to let sports fall too high up the list. And my first recommendation would be really the Sabbath rest that you're talking about. The easiest way to do it is always protect Sunday. You have to protect Sunday. And then really my 2 other recommendations are, because I know there's families out there that their kids are in, high level sports, and they can be intense and they can be time consuming, and they love it and you don't want to take them out of it. So I'm not saying that. But just make sure then that you're giving equal due time to the faith, whether that's family prayer in the morning or the afternoon, or there's a lot of different ways you can do it. So I don't want to get kind of prescriptive.
Yeah.
But just make sure that it holds its rightful place, that it is not the most important thing, and that it is not the thing that gives a child his or her identity.
Yeah.
Because it's one of the modern idols of the day, that's for sure. But it's a good thing in its own right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Taylor, for sharing your story.
It was great to be on.
And also
Thank
for
you.
those words of wisdom. Again, like kind of we were talking about, the faith provides the context even for all the good things of this life. I think one of the great things about being Catholic is the sacramental worldview, that is sort of embedded in our faith, recognizing that the world is good. God made it and declared it so. But the question is whether we receive it, whether we grasp at it, like in the garden, or whether we receive it as a gift from our Father in the faith. And so the faith provides the context, not just for, well, most importantly for our salvation, in our identity and our future in heaven with Christ, but it also, even in this life, it allows us to see the good things of this world as a gift and to receive them in a way that blesses us and blesses the Lord.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, thank you so much for your work. Again, check out AugustineInstitute.org for more of Taylor's work and the great work they're doing over there. And thank you again for joining us for this episode of the Journey Home program. I pray that Taylor's story was an inspiration to you. We'll be back again next week with another story. Until then, God bless.